I ask a question because I'm external to the state of Minnesota?
Please.
Okay, I don't know if I should be in this part of the session because you may have some meeting things that you do prior to this. And so if I need to turn off my video and mic, I'm certainly welcome. Certainly willing to do that.
Sometimes it makes sense to have a mic off during, but this is a public meeting and we appreciate you spending the time with us and your presentation, but you are certainly under no obligation to listen to the stuff that we talk about. But you are certainly free to do so.
Okay, I just thought I would at least acknowledge that I'm external and I just wanted to be respectful.
No, and I appreciate that very much. And I hope you're in a warm place.
Thank you.
And are we recording? I might have missed it if we are. Okay. Thank you so much. Why don't we call the meeting to order? This is the Human Services Background Study Eligibility Task Force. Today is the 25th of February, and we are called to order. Mr. Vogel, will you do a formal roll call at this time?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Senator Champion. Senator Champion. Ms. Dawson.
Present.
Mr. Esme.
Present.
Ms. Evans.
Present.
Present.
Ms. Huntley.
Present.
Mr. Urban.
Present.
Ms. Kaser.
Present.
Mr. Kammer. I'm sorry, Mr. Kammer. Okay, Mr. Kammer. I'll mark you as absent. Wasn't sure if that was you or not. Judge Kulik.
Present.
And I'm sorry, Lieutenant Knotts, I skipped you. All right, Lieutenant Knotts. Senator Matthews. Senator Matthews. Ms. Mattson.
Present.
Representative Moeller.
Present.
Inspector General Modi.
Present.
Mr. Page.
Present.
Mr. Page. Oh, Mr. Page. Thank you. Ms. Robertus. Ms. Robertus. Representative Robbins.
Present.
Mr. Sandoval.
Present.
Judge Satterback.
Present.
Ms. Sherlock.
Present.
Mr. Tatum.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Williamson.
Present.
Ms. Williamson. Oh, Ms. Williamson.
Present.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Chair, 19 of the 24 members are present. A quorum is present.
So will you just try to see, Roy is trying to get in and he was waiting in the waiting room and he's having a hard time, so.
Ms. Evans, Madam Chair, I'll keep an eye on the waiting room and try to let him in.
Thank you, Mr. Vogel, and thank you, everyone. We've got a lot of people here, and why don't we dig right in? We know we have people with busy schedules. The first thing we need to address is that a copy of the meeting minutes from our last meeting, which was February 7th, those meetings have been posted on the task force website, and want to open it up to see if anybody has any corrections, additions, or anything at all with those meeting minutes. Okay, seeing that there are no hands raised and no items that need to be corrected, we will then adopt those meeting minutes as approved and distributed. We have a couple speakers today, and we're going to move right in. Ms. Dawson is going to lead us with a discussion with an individual who has some lived experience. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Dawson to lead us. Thank you so much, Ms. Dawson.
Thank you. So we do have with us today one of my former clients who was subject to a permanent disqualification. It was a juvenile offense, and it's actually considered a confidential record, as well as the record has been expunged. So He is present with us today without his camera on and listed as John Doe to retain some privacy for this, but he and I prepared some questions to go through his lived experience. And so we're going to get going with that. All right. So John Doe, if you could unmute and we'll get ready to go.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for being here today. So John, if you could just tell the group what it was that you were charged with when you were a juvenile.
I was charged with first degree and second degree CSC, and I pled to second degree.
Okay. And how old were you when you were charged?
12.
Okay. And at the time of the allegation, do you remember how old you were?
12, I might have been 11, a little bit earlier on towards the beginning of the incident.
Court process.
I remember going to court with my family. I remember a lot of that. I remember it being really tense, really serious. I remember it felt like there was a lot of gravitas to the situation. There was a lot of gravitas to the process. But understanding, the full grasp was really a foreign concept to me. It was just kind of something that I was going through rather than understood what was happening. I was aware of the weight that it carried, the impact that it had on everybody in my family, the impact that everyone who had been brought in to the case as well. And I knew the kind of impact that it could have going forward, but it was just very foreign to me, as I said. I knew that what was going to happen going forward with the case was going to be dependent a lot on my actions and how capable I was in processing a lot of the information that was coming up to light, and a lot of what was expected of me was going to be a lot of growth really quickly. And I knew that I had acted extremely immaturely, but I needed to prove that that wasn't who I was as a person, especially at that age. And I knew that there was a expectancy that I matured very quickly following this incident.
And do you remember what was the outcome of that case?
I got a stay of adjudication, which was agreed to by everyone involved, and my case was dismissed at the end of the case upon completion of all of the treatment and everything that came afterwards.
Okay. So, and what did you do for treatment?
I went to Cornerstone Therapy. I was also on probation for 2 years, I believe. I went to Cornerstone Therapy for over a year with Tom Newkirk-Lido, I believe was his full name. And that lasted for at least a year, if I remember correctly, but I continued after the fact as well. After the requirement was finished, I also continued with him for quite a while longer than that as well.
And what did you learn from treatment?
I learned that a lot of the contributing factors to the whole situation had been from completely separate stressors that were influencing a lot of my decision making at the time. The biggest of which I knew is that I was adopted, and my biological father had a criminal history. And at such a young age, I was very much under the impression that since we shared the same DNA, that I was, destined to have the same future. I remember feeling a lot of and believing like I was supposed to behave and act inappropriately. Like it was expected that I just wouldn't behave well as I grew. And in my therapy, I learned that this wasn't the case. That wasn't what was expected of me, and that also wasn't a healthy mindset, and it was extremely immature, really. It was a naive way of viewing myself and viewing my place in society. I learned healthier ways to deal with my stressors and healthier ways to process the world. And then I also learned a lot of directions that I needed to take in order to mature as they were expecting of me. And we worked a lot on that and what the best ways were to process a lot of the stressors that were in my life.
And what was your understanding as to how this juvenile court matter would affect you going forward in your life?
Judge Quaintance probably was the greatest understanding that I had, as she really impressed upon me the gravitas of the situation. She did a very good job illustrating to me that it was not to be taken lightly in any sense. It was a very heavy and emotional weight that I needed to make sure was understood and thought about continuously, and that it should leave a lasting impression on me. And it definitely did, as I grew into a teenager. She also impressed upon me that I had made substantial progress by the time I was done, which was a large thing for me to see. She really thought that I had matured a lot just in the amount of time that she had seen. And she actually said that she did not want this to follow me as a matter of my record for the rest of my life, when they had made such a strong intervention successfully at such an early stage in my development.
And after all of this, did you graduate from high school?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Did you go to college?
I did.
And what else did you do to contribute after all of this took place?
I stayed involved in a lot of activities. I continued with sports that I was part of: soccer, swimming. I did all kinds of different school activities as well as church activities. I did theater, choir. I went to church camp, where a lot of the kids from my school went to as well. I became a camp counselor. I volunteered at places like Feed My Starving Children, and I went to a lot of the activities that were charity events involved with my sports that the team did. I made sure to really keep myself involved with a lot of positively influencing people and everything.
And did you have any additional offenses?
No.
And what was your degree from college?
Neuroscience, Bachelor of Science.
Okay. And once you graduated from college, did you begin applying for jobs?
Yes, I did.
And at some point, were you disqualified?
I was.
And did you learn you had a permanent bar?
I did. I got a letter in the mail that said you have been permanently disqualified from your career.
And how did that affect you?
It was a very shocking and really a life-shattering kind of moment for me to receive that. I definitely remember that the very first words out of my mouth were just, "Mom, I need you." You know, I really needed a lot of help. I was shaking. I really couldn't gravitate myself back to myself for a minute. I really had to rein myself down and calm down for a couple of minutes before we could figure out what was going on. I really felt like everything that I had just done over the last couple of years, college and getting my degree and working towards, what my dreams were going to be, had really just gone away in an instant. That was it. I was done.
And so because there was a permanent bar, did you agree that the only option was an expungement for you?
Yeah, we even tried to get a reconsideration passed, and that we didn't really expect much to fly, but it certainly didn't. And yes, the expungement was the only option following that.
Okay. And was that a guarantee?
Absolutely not.
Okay. What do you do now?
Currently, I am a pharmaceutical manufacturer. I make pharmaceutical pain drugs for people in chronic pain, and I came to this job after leaving a chronic pain clinic where I worked with people who are in daily chronic pain every single day of their life. So I've really had 2 jobs so far that have really been very substantial in that regard.
And how has all of this continued to affect you?
I would say that this has affected me in 2 really different ways throughout my life. The first of which is obviously the emotional effect and the terms of my development coming into adulthood. It's always stayed with me. It's never been forgotten, or it's never left my mind. It's always been there, kind of influencing me to continuously make sure that I'm paying attention to my behaviors and what I do, and that I look for the healthy ways to do things, as well as, you know, making sure that I really stick to the good path in life and being a good human being. The second way is a lot more negative. It's not nearly as positive of a impact on me. It's served as a continuous barrier for me as I've looked forward to my future. Even, you know, even when I was a teenager, I remember, you know, it's always going to be there. I have to remember that. I always have to remind myself that this could still be out there somewhere as a matter of my record, you know. And it was a mistake that I made at an age that I could barely even recall. But it's continued to dictate my life choices and the doors that are really open and available to me, and the life experiences that I've been allowed to experience for myself. This lasted through a lot of my teen years, and you know, whether or not I should even choose to become a camp counselor, that was really an inspiring accomplishment for a lot of people that had come in the years before me that I knew. And it was something that everybody wanted to do. It was the big thing, but I really had to consider whether or not that was even something I could do. And then those impressions continued all the way into my adulthood, where, you know, I spent 4 years at college, which was a huge blessing that a lot of people aren't undergo. I'm the first one of my family who's able to do that, really. And nearly immediately after graduating from getting my degree, I was effectively told that it's meaningless. You won't ever be able to use it to help people as you intended. You won't be able to do anything really with it. And it really just kind of turned into a waste of time once I got that letter. And so, you know, once I read that letter, I mean, Judge Quaintance's words were still in my head and have never left, is that she really wanted this to not follow me. But despite that wish she had for me, it really has followed me. And then it was only after the expungement finally came through and we were able to make it through that I was able to look back on it and say, you know, there are a lot of good lessons I learned here, both through the actual event as well as my own understanding and processing of it as I've grown up. But this was the first time that I was really able to move on from it and say, I can really leave this behind me for the first time, and that my possibilities are open and endless for the first time. That was really a big, impactful moment, especially for, you know, a mistake that I made as a child, which I can barely even remember being that age. And the actual mistake itself is unfathomable to me as an adult. It really is an abhorrent idea or concept that could have occurred, and did. And the lessons have never left me, but that was really the first time that I was able to move on from it and grow, I think.
Thank you so much, Chair Giffen. That was what we had planned. So unless there's anything else.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Dawson, and thank you for your client for being brave enough to talk about this. It is really, really appreciated by this group. I see that Mr. Esme has his hand up, and I want to make sure that we get to that. I don't know if it involves this individual, but please, Mr. Esme.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to our speaker, thank you. First of all, thank you so much. Appreciate immensely your willingness to come and talk about, you know, something pretty difficult. I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how you found out that you could even have an expungement as a potential remedy.
Yeah. The biggest thing that occurred was really, we got the disqualification letter, and I said, you know, I spoke to my parents right away, and the first thing that we agreed we needed to do was really just reach out to our previous lawyer who had helped me all those years ago, reach out to him somehow and figure out what the next steps would be. And, you know, why this was happening, if the supposedly the records had been, you know, confidential, had been sealed, had been made sure that everything was not going to affect me for the rest of my life, as Judge Quinton said. And when we got in touch with them, they directed us to Ms. Dawson. who then brought up the expungement as a possibility.
So if I could just ask a clarifying question, I mean, just to be clear here, it's because you had access to actually, you know, 2 other lawyers with expertise after this issue came up that you even found out that there was a possible remedy, right?
Yes, absolutely. If that had not been available to me, and I was very lucky that it was, if that had not been available to me, I really would have been stuck in the mud, would have been a proper term. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm so glad that that didn't happen. And thank you again.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Esme. And I see Judge Kulik has her hand up. Please, Judge.
Well, first, thank you to John Doe for telling us your story. And I'm sure many of you recall that I had a similar story of a similar aged person, 1 year younger, the 11-year-old boy in foster care who committed an offense. Unfortunately, he didn't have any advocates. He didn't get a stay of adjudication. And despite the fact that 20 years later, he never reoffended anything except suffering from addiction, which led to petty thievery and trespass, he was still homelessness, unregistered sex offender with multiple felonies, and his life has been ruined. And I think these offenses, when children are too young to even be considered to be tried as adults, there's a reason, and it's because they're not competent. I've had charges brought against 9 and 10-year-olds and felony level vandalism, and I've challenged the prosecutor by letting them know that I'd have a Rule 20 competency evaluation because I knew they were too young to even understand the process, just as this John Doe was too young. And that's why I know it's these offenses are so politically charged, but these are still children, and I believe they should not have that permanent disqualification. And if we need some other safety nets, so anything below a certain age, say 14, subject to passage of time and maybe a diagnostic assessment, maybe successful juvenile treatment in the sex offender program, that they do not have that permanent disqualification. It doesn't make sense. And it holds people back from things that, yeah, I'm glad that John Doe kept referring to himself as a child, as a 12-year-old child. And I admire how much responsibility he takes for it, but he was a child. All right, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge. And I'm just going to throw in my 2 cents too, and this might follow a little bit with Mr. Esme's comments, that we know just that there are a lot of people who might be able to obtain an expungement, don't have the resources, don't have just the ability to pursue them, don't find a great advocate like Lucas Dawson to make it happen. So even when there's a positive here, there are a lot of people that are never going to be able to pursue this, and certainly will never be successful. And again, we'll conclude with just thank you to John Doe. Thank you for your time. And thank you, Ms. Dawson. Next on our agenda is another presentation from the employer side. And I'm going to have the vice chair take it from there. Ms. Evans. Well, let's see if we have Ms. Evans. Well, oh, hi, Gina.
Sorry about that. Rep Long called me. Bad. Sorry. Tell me, ask the question again.
We are now having Lutheran Social
Am I
Services
introducing
for the-
LSS?
Yeah,
So,
please.
okay, thanks, John. LSS has offered to talk about the impact that that they're a huge employer in the state, and they work with a lot of folks in home. And Jeru said that Joyce would be the best person to talk about the impact that employment has, the background studies have had on their employment, and maybe some of the stories that they've been able to pull together. And so I'd just like to introduce Joyce. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And you have about 10 or 15 minutes to share with us the experience of Lutheran Social Services. Joyce, you're on mute.
Good morning. Thank you very, very much. It's an honor to be here. And as I listen to the roll call, it's like, wow, such an esteemed group of individuals. We really do appreciate the time that you're giving us to share from a provider side, our experience, particularly with the background check. I am Joyce Norrells. I serve as the VP of Human Resource for LSS of Minnesota. For those of you who may not know much about LSS of Minnesota, we're a statewide social service organization. We have approximately 2,500 employees, 10,000 plus volunteers that support much of the work that we do. And as a provider, what I like to share, I think is critically important and will also really dovetail very nicely with the comments we heard from John Doe, who was courageous enough to share his experience, and from the others who made comments. I like to say that LSS has 160 programs that fall under your requirements for Net Study 2.0. And between the year of October 2020 through September 2021, we have submitted 1,768 requests for background checks. With that, as an employer, particularly in the areas of home and community-based services, as many of you may be aware, staffing really is a challenge, particularly today. Attracting people, retaining people is critical. Because we provide care, particularly in our residential services, 24/7. And so the dedication of people and being able to retain good people is really, really important. What I'd like to share with you about the background studies and what we encounter is that when we submit the background checks and get notice of disqualifications, oftentimes, well, I should say most times, we don't have any reason why a person has been disqualified. And many times that notice comes after we have really invested in the person. They may be working for us pending the results of the review. And in that time, considerable investment is made in training people, as well as relationships are being built, particularly when you're serving others. Our employees connect with the individuals and really support them in living full lives. And so when they're snatched out of the workforce, once a disqualification is made, it really creates a lot of disruption, not only for the people that serve, but their colleagues as well, and of course, the individual. When we submitted those in the period that I'm talking about, we do know that 65 individuals were disqualified. We also learned that at least 35 individuals did go through the process for reconsideration, and they were successful. So that's more than half of the disqualifications. And so with that, it raises the question as to the criteria that is used. And listening to John Doe and even the judge that spoke, it makes me as a HR professional wonder if all offenses are equal. Is there a perspective or a lens that should be considered as we look at individuals and what has or hasn't occurred in their life? And John Doe, as having had an offense as a youth, have something carried forward through the rest of his life. The judge referenced someone that made a mistake and rehabilitated. And yet, due to systems that we have, was not allowed to stabilize themselves. And so what had happened in the past while wasn't relevant in the future, continue to adversely impact that individual's life. So here again, want to say that maybe some examination of how we evaluate criteria and what things are considered in that disqualification process may be something that we like to look at. Then as we continue on, I like to point out that the process itself can create a barrier. Oftentimes it's not a quick process, so it could take a couple of months up to a year or sometimes better. With that, of course, when someone is disqualified, and even if they pursue reconsideration to get a set aside, what happens in the interim is oftentimes people have to move on. So where we might lose a very qualified individual, and when they choose to pursue the reconsideration process, because people have to keep a roof over their head and food on the table, they have to move on and look for other employment. So that certainly adversely impacts the workforce available to serve and provide services to individuals, vulnerable individuals. And they may be people that are really worthy of the opportunity to continue to work. But the barrier of the process itself is overwhelming. When one does consider or pursue the reconsideration process, it's daunting, very daunting. They have to gather a lot of data, time consuming, but oftentimes it's data that is from years ago. So if you don't have the resources, the capabilities, or don't know how to navigate systems, oftentimes people may give up. So while I don't know, or we don't know what the rate of requests may be, we do know that the process is overwhelming and daunting. And here again, as John Doe spoke, the trauma that people may have to experience and just having to revisit something that they thought they successfully have moved beyond can be devastating for an individual's life. So that is something that we need to consider there. And again, I just want to emphasize, if we have a success rate for those with requests for reconsideration, in LSS, it was 65 disqualifications and 35 people that were successful. It does beg the question about the criteria. And I want to emphasize that I do understand the priority of safety, because we too, as an organization, want to ensure the safety of those we serve, as well as the colleagues that are working with these individuals. So I don't ever want to minimize that. But I do want to suggest that we revisit the process, as well as maybe the criteria or how it's weighted with certain individuals. So that's what happens with an individual. As a provider, the impact of the process is that, here again, we have people that may come into the system that we invest in, that are building relationships with people they serve, that get a letter that says you're disqualified, and we don't have a choice. If we have to terminate them based on that, we have to terminate it. And as John Doe indicated, to get that news unexpectedly can be devastating for a person. There's the loss of a good staff. There's the interruption in the workforce, and particularly now, this is really difficult, as it is difficult to even attract and retain people in the workforce. We all hear about the Great Resignation. People are leaving the workforce, but they're not necessarily returning back in the same numbers that they're leaving. So to lose people who are really good and have proven themselves to be really good employees is very difficult. And then finally, I'd just like to share one of the stories that our managers shared with us. So as we begin to pull data to share with the task force, and some data has been provided by my colleagues, we did ask our managers firsthand, what have their experience when an employee has been notified that they've been disqualified. One story that was shared with me is about a woman who's had a child that was very, very difficult, had some severe behavior problems. And due to an incident in the home where he had a slight injury, or had an injury, I can't say how slight it was, he began to tell people that it was due to his mother. And so that resulted in her being charged with an offense that was on her record. She had been hired by LSS in 2014, I believe it is. I'm sorry, 2016. The disqualification was related to an incident that happened in 2014. But here she had worked for us for a number of years before this came to light. Come to find out, her son had really misrepresented the facts and had recanted his story. She did pursue reconsideration, but here again, the process is quite daunting. But she was resilient, hung in there, and worked through the process and was allowed to return to work. But again, this was a devastating experience for the individual. And then also it had an adverse impact on the relationships she built for those that she was caring for, and particularly home and community services. People working with people build relationships. So there's a sense of loss even for the individual that is being served. It's a very difficult, daunting process, and very challenging for those who may experience that. So I probably didn't speak that story eloquently. John Doe did a beautiful job. The judge did a beautiful job. But I just really want to emphasize that there is a real need to reevaluate the process, how it's implemented, and recognize the impact that it has on people's lives, not just the individual that has been disqualified, and sometimes when the offense doesn't really correlate at all with the work that they're doing. And so we just ask that this task force continue the good work that you're doing and reevaluate some of those things.
Well, thank you so much. If you can stay on, I think we have a couple of questions for you. And to be honest, I wouldn't want to follow Judge Kulik and John Doe either. And I thought you were very eloquent and fantastic. And I thank you for your time. Mr. Esme, do you have a question?
Yeah, just a brief one. Thank you so much for joining us and speaking and sharing your perspective. You had talked about losing or having employees be disqualified after they had been on the job long enough to show that they were good employees and doing their job well and making a difference. But you also mentioned that sometimes these background studies take months, or like, I think you said upwards of a year, even more. Have you had people disqualified after they've been working that long?
We have. So
Okay.
here again, there's a considerable, I'm sorry about, I don't know what happened to my video. I apologize for that. So a considerable investment has been made in people, and the work that we do, the licensure requirements require us to train people appropriately, to work effectively with individuals. And that training is not just a one-time shot, it's throughout their work career with us. And so you invest considerably in an employee, that individual has contributed greatly to a client's life, those that we serve. And here again, on a moment's notice, we may be told they have to be removed from work. And it could be upwards to a year and several years.
Enough time to show that they were able to do that work safely and effectively, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Esme. Vice Chair Evans, please.
Thank you so much, Joyce, for your presentation. I really appreciate you taking the time to put your presentation together and to be here today. We too find that after the time, taking the time to train and be with people, and for us, we at Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, we hire graduates of our program after they've been with us a year, and oftentimes through our leadership and training institute, which is an entire additional year. And so we've been with them oftentimes for 2 years, plus the training period as an employee. Sometimes that background study process can take up to 6 months. So we've been with them 30 months, then to have DHS tell us that no, they've seen the paperwork and they've decided this person doesn't have the character to do this work. And so we too understand what you're talking about. So I have a question for you. Yesterday in the background or the Behavioral Health Committee, Senator Nelson down in Southern Minnesota talked about some home care providers that are going to have to close. There are, I think, 8 of them, they said, 30 families that are going to have to close down in Southern Minnesota because of lack of staffing.
Right.
I think Senator Abler mentioned there are 30 families that they're going to have to find alternative housing for because it's 100% a staffing issue. And Commissioner Harpstead was talking about that they're going to have to do some crisis management around that March 4th. And I just am wondering if you all at LSS have any of your facilities where staffing is at that kind of crisis level, where staffing is low enough that you're seeing that level of trouble.
We've had a few, and so it is quite a challenge. And so for the existing staff, people are working to provide the service and provide the coverage, which of course impacts their family lives as well. But yes, we've had, but not that many homes, just a few where we've had to find locations we could maybe move people. I do know of a couple of homes where we had to relocate clients to homes that we can have properly staffed, because there is a staff ratio that you must maintain in the homes that might vary depending on the client's needs. There are some that maybe it's 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, depending on their needs or their behaviors. And so staffing is at a real crisis.
Yeah, it was very interesting in the hearing, the same personal care, home and community-based services, home care provider, nursing homes that were seeing the largest disqualifications was the same list that DHS had up on the board with the staffing crisis. Exact same list they had up on the board that we have for disqualifications. And I don't know that that's a coincidence. So thank you again. I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Evans. Madam Chair Williamson has her hand up, please.
Thank you for all that are in attendance and for the speakers. I've been very moved by what I've heard. I just wanted to, just a quick question, and you may, our speaker, you may not have the answer here, and maybe this is something that you can gather the information and provide to our Vice Chair Evans later. I'm just curious as to if you know what the fiscal amount of that attrition has been for your organization.
That is something I would have to get back to you on to give you an exact number, so that it's accurate and clear. But I can tell you that it's quite significant. We have, in an effort to retain people, we have tried to increase wages, because of course, for the workforce that we're looking at, we would probably consider entry-level positions, although I consider those employees professionals. To be able to care and give to another individual is truly a professional. It may not carry a degree behind it, but it truly is. But our competitors are not just necessarily other providers. Our competitors could be McDonald's or Walmart or Cub Food for that example. And so as you drive through communities, I'm sure you're seeing hiring signs that are offering 15, 18, whatever dollars. And so for those of us who are working and under contracts and the like, having to stretch dollars to compete becomes really quite a challenge. And so, and then the work itself is challenging. Let's really acknowledge that. The work itself is challenging. If any of you have ever cared for a child or parent or a grandparent that has needs, that there really takes, I call it a labor of love, because it really takes a lot for a person to day after day do that kind of care. And so being able to retain those people and show value becomes really critical. And for them, it's pay, oftentimes. People here again, I say, you need to keep a roof over your head and food on the table. Pay becomes important, benefits become important, and all of those things carry a price tag. And so you invest in people, training is expensive, turnover itself is expensive, the time it takes to recruit, the overtime that you pay others to protect that work, to ensure the safety of those individuals that we're serving, all of that has a price tag. So I would have to come back with that information, but yes, it's quite exorbitant. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for your presentation. It's so helpful for us to hear from the employer side too, how these laws affect not only a business or a nonprofit, but its staff, and of course, ultimately the people that are served by the staff, who are probably, I think, most important. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time and dedication.
I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys. This is such a very important initiative that you're doing, and I couldn't express my appreciation more. And if I could provide any additional information, be a support in any kind of way, feel free to let me know. And thank
you so much.
Have
and
a blessed day.
We certainly understand the weight of it too. So we are in agreement on that. Thank you so much. And with that, I think we'll move on then. We're going to now move on to, as I think the entire task force knows, we have a report due. We have a March 1st report. So today we have to sort of agree on what we're going to say and the language. Mr. Vogel had disseminated, I think, a copy of each subcommittee's contribution to the report. As I think everybody knows, we have an interim report, and then we'll have a final report. The focus of the interim report is that we are identifying issues to continue to focus on, but in truth, we don't have those specific legislative changes or recommendations for legislative changes that we might in the future. So essentially, and I'm being very broad here, and I'll defer to Mr. Vogel if he has anything else to add, but the language was intended to say there are issues that we see, we need more time, and we'll be more specific on that next one. Maybe I'll just ask, is there anybody that has not received a copy of, I guess it would be a member that has not received a copy of Mr. Vogel's proposed report? If so, please just sort of through the raise hand function, let us know, because we certainly want to make sure you have it. I don't see anybody's hands raised. Mr. Vogel, with your skills, do you see anybody who's raising a hand?
No, Mr. Chair, but please, if any members hasn't received a copy of the report and isn't able to indicate so now, please just let me know.
And so I think at this point, what we need to do is certainly open it up for discussion. And then I think our goal would be, we would need a formal roll call to determine and vote on whether or not the language that we have so far can be adopted, resolved to, and moving on as our final report. Are there any questions, additions, thoughts about the proposed interim report? Mr. Page, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did just have one suggestion for the overview section on page 3.
And Mr. Vogel, maybe could you bring up and just share it so we're all looking at the same
Certainly, Mr.
language
Chair.
at the same time? Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Page. Please proceed.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I thought the entire report is a very good summary of what the task force has been doing. I thought and I think one of the nice features of the website that is mentioned is the ability for the public to submit comments to the group. And I'm wondering if we should include a statement to that end that individuals who have additional comments can submit those through the website. But that's all I have.
Bad.
Okay, and I would say I think that's a fantastic idea. But I think maybe, and Mr. Vogel, I'll defer to you. Why don't we keep these as we go through it as possible additions, and then we will vote on the additions. And then, do you think that's the best way to proceed, Mr. Vogel?
Mr. Chair, yes, that sounds like a good plan. I'll just note that since the whole task force would be approving the language of this report today, we'll need you or Vice Chair Evans or some officers of the task force to be empowered to approve any of those sort of corrections or additional language that would be inserted after this meeting today. But that does sound like a good plan to me.
Do
Okay.
we need a motion for that now or after the discussion?
Why don't we keep the discussion open to see if there are some other changes
Okay.
that we want to include? I see that Inspector Modi's hand is up. Maybe she has something she wants to add. So let's just sort of keep a running tally and then loop back with addition and vote on possible additions. Yeah, Inspector Modi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. DHS has just started to take a look at this. We do have some concerns about the way that some of our data has been interpreted that doesn't necessarily align with how we interpret and use the data. So we will be willing to provide feedback. We just are starting to go over and review the report. So we don't have that available at this time.
I think then, I think we have to vote today on the report as written today. And I would encourage the department then to maybe provide something that can be public that identifies its concerns, how the data's been put together, and provide a written, almost like a response. I mean, certainly we want to get it right, but we do have to vote on it. And you can certainly agree to vote no, but we do have to get a vote today. Does that make sense, Inspector Modi?
Yes, that does. I just wanted to, just let you know that we did have some concerns on that. I do know that we're going to be also reaching out to our partners over at MDH as this will impact them as well. And so we just hadn't had an opportunity to do that after receiving the report yet. So if you are soliciting, we can also provide it DHS's response in writing too.
And I'll defer to DHS how DHS wants to respond, but we want to ensure that you and your agency feel like you have an avenue to be heard, because that is certainly our intent. Does anybody else have anything they want to add, change, recommend to the proposed interim report? Mr. Vogel, I think the first vote should be whether or not the group agrees to add Mr. Page's proposed change. And maybe we should just sort of figure out language, because it seems to me what you're saying, Mr. Page, is should we include the fact that we've created a mechanism for individuals to provide their personal stories to the group? There's nothing magic about what I just said, but is that accurate?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So it would seem to me, Mr. Vogel, that what we want to do is get a just a request that I think do two things with that, is that we add something to the interim report but the language would be, it would be in the spirit of what we just said, but the actual language would be deferred to the chair and vice chair and Mr. Vogel to just select actual language. But we'd need somebody to move on that.
That would be my
Chair.
motion, Mr. Chair.
And I second.
Second and third, it's all good. Mr. Vogel, do you want to take a roll call on that and see if we can do a vote? Just again, this is on the addition of language that is identifying that we're including both on the website and in our work here, the input from people with lived experience.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. So the motion to adopt the spirit of Mr. Page's suggestion. Yes, I'll take a roll call then. Senator Champion. Senator Champion. Ms. Dawson.
In favor.
Okay. Mr. Esme.
In favor.
Ms. Evans.
In favor.
Mr. Geffen.
In favor.
Mr. Hanson.
In favor.
Ms. Huntley. Ms. Huntley. Mr. Irvin.
In favor.
Ms. Kaser.
In favor.
Mr. Kammer.
In favor.
Lieutenant Knotts. Lieutenant Knotts. Judge Gulick.
I'm in favor.
Senator Matthews. Senator Matthews. Ms. Mattson.
In favor.
Representative Mueller. Representative Mueller. Inspector General Modi.
In favor.
Mr. Page.
In favor.
Ms. Robertus. Ms. Robertus. Representative Robbins. Representative Robbins. Mr. Sandoval.
In favor.
Judge Satterback.
In favor.
Ms. Sherlock.
In favor.
Mr. Tatum.
Favor.
Ms. Williamson.
In favor.
All right, Mr. Chair, the ayes are 17 with no nays. The motion carries.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vogel, and thank you so much, Mr. Page, for what I think is a wonderful addition and suggestion. So now we have the business of adopting the interim language. I know that Mr. Sandoval had a resolution proposed on that. Mr. Sandoval?
Yeah, I wanted to make a motion to approve the draft interim report to permit staff to make technical corrections to the text of the report and to empower the chair and vice chair to approve the final draft of the report.
Thank you, Mr. Sandoval. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, Ms. Williamson. And so I think this is similar to what we just went through, that the final language, we might make some technical changes, grammatical, just whatever, but small. And this would then approve the interim report as written, but allow us to make some minor technical changes, which will be disseminated to obviously all members and to the public. Is there any comment on that we need to have prior to the vote? Yes, Ms. Robertus.
Hi, sorry, we're moving so fast. I'm trying to digest some things and someone sitting in a seat from a state agency. I'm actually having to pause a tad because I guess if DHS could give an example of where they believe the data is not accurately portrayed in the report would be helpful for me. I don't believe that anyone on this committee either would want to submit a report that has inaccurately portrayed data. And so if there's a couple examples to help me kind of grasp and make some connections, it would be really helpful.
And I certainly agree. And I think we didn't do that before because my understanding, and I'll certainly defer to Inspector Mahdi, was that hadn't been completely ironed out yet, that was in process, but I will not speak for DHS. Ms. Mahdi, please.
We haven't had a whole lot of time to be able to fully go through it, but a lot of it is things aren't like what I call like apples to comparison. So when you talk about applications, when you which are different, when you talk about distinct persons and distinct determinations, and as you cross things over like that and try to compare them all together, it can be problematic. So we're wanting to go through and make sure that how things are grouped together, how percentages were pulled together, that it is using the same interpretation or similar interpretations to what we do. And if it's not, provide that explanation and or provide what how we would group that, or how answering that question. And so we just haven't had sufficient time to be able to go through and provide that feedback.
Ms. Robertus or others, I want to give you time to respond to that. Maybe Mr. Robertus, I'm going to go to Mr. Esme, and you look deep in thought, and we'll loop back to you when we can give you ample time. And maybe after that, we'll pull up the actual report again and talk about specific spots if we have time. But yes, Mr. Esme.
Yeah, I've been sitting here kind of thinking about Ms. Modi's feedback on that too. And I'm not a part of the data subcommittee. And so I'm not even necessarily kind of advocating for this idea, but just kind of for the sake of thinking through how we might be able to build a consensus. I wonder if adopting some additional language that just clarifies that these are preliminary interpretations of this data and that we're still working on getting the data that we need, and that DHS is working on making sure that these interpretations of the data are accurate, might ease everyone's concerns.
And could we add to that, Mr. Esme, do you think maybe that if data is changed or it needed to be updated, we could certainly amend?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I didn't even think of that.
Mr. Vogel, under the current scheme of where we have an interim report and then a final report, is there an ability to amend if the data needs to be changed to some degree?
Mr. Chair, as far as I'm aware, the interim report that's turned in on March 1st would be the final copy of that interim report that's available for the legislature. However, if you don't mind, I'd like to defer to Michelle Weber at the LCC to see if she has any additional comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Vogel. Good morning, Ms. Weber.
Mr. Chair, members, I'm Michelle Weber, the Director of the Legislative Coordinating Commission. Mr. Vogel is correct. This report, once filed, would be the official report filed on behalf of the task force. And then a final report would be filed at a later date, but there wouldn't be a revision to the report. So the task force might want to consider whether or not there are specific data points that are in question that maybe should be removed from the report at this point to meet the March 1st timeline, and then later incorporated into a final report.
Thank you very much, Ms. Weber. And Mr. Esme, I didn't know if your hand didn't go down or if it's up again. Now it's down. So
it was up again, actually.
Okay, please.
I just wonder if instead of saying that we would amend the report, that we could highlight that any corrections to these preliminary interpretations of the data would be reflected in the final report. Because I do think that some of those issues that the data is being used to highlight are things that it is important to communicate to the public and to the legislature that we're looking at and taking seriously. So it seems tough to me to strike language, but I do think it's important that we communicate clearly that that we are still working through this, that we're still getting data, we're still interpreting some data, we still have some questions about what that data means, and that we're working to answer them.
Okay. Ms. Dawson.
Thank you. And I was just going to piggyback on that. I think that makes sense. I mean, this is a preliminary report. I don't think I even just think in terms of if there's ever an expert report in a court hearing, they always add at the end that it's subject to change or further update once they learn additional information. I think I do feel like, especially if we don't have clear points of what exactly it is and why, and I understand that DHS is still processing that, but we also have a March 1st deadline. So I definitely would support what Mr. Esme suggested, and I think that that makes sense to try to reach some consensus, especially since the data subcommittee is the one that's really been looking at this. And so I really like Mr. Esme's idea, and I would support that sort of as a way to try to find consensus and know we're all keeping an open mind and are definitely open to modifications and to taking a more final view later on.
Thank you, Ms. Dawson. Mr. Page?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the interest of having a concrete proposal and plan going forward, I would make a motion to allow Inspector Modi and others at DHS to craft a 1 sentence or 2 sentence caveat that could be submitted with the data portion of the report, subject to the chair's approval, to allow for that context or explanation to be included in this report rather than removing. So that would be my motion. I think it would be prudent to do that rather than removing the data, which raises legitimate issues, but could allow some additional, I think it would flag the issue for anyone reading the report and allow us to explain that in our subsequent report.
And I would just ask, and thank you so much, Mr. Page. Inspector Modi, is that something the department is prepared to do in a somewhat quick manner since it is due March 1st?
I think we are able to do with that. I mean, I will say that we just haven't even had a chance to meet to be able to fully review this and done our internal review, but I think we can be able to craft a statement that can convey what Mr. Page had said.
Okay, and in terms of timing, do you think the department could have that completed by close of business on Monday?
We'll do that.
Okay, I mean, so we do have at this point a motion. And do we have?
I second.
Mr. Chair, if I might make a parliamentary point, there is already a motion on the table, Mr. Sandoval's motion.
Right.
One parliamentary option would be to amend Mr. Sandoval's motion to include Mr. Page's motion.
That would be my actual motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and so that's a new motion, Mr. Sandoval. We're going to just sort of piggyback the two together. Does anybody second the Page Sandoval motion?
I second.
I do want to. I feel like I told Mr. Burtis we would get back to her though, and I do want to do that before any vote occurs. Mr. Burtis.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think if I'm being fully transparent, I'm still struggling with this a tad. But that's okay. That's an okay space to be in, and there's some motions out there, and hopefully this can get cleaned up a little bit.
Okay, and I see Miss Evans' hands up, and maybe we'll just
So
I think, go on, please.
I just, in looking at this, my remembrance looking at it yesterday and the day before, the data that we included is really only on pages 8 and 9, correct, Will?
Ms. Evans, correct.
Right at the beginning. And so I just am wondering if Kulani, is it going to be as much? Yeah, no, you guys. Yeah, it's not. You're not going to be able to get through that in a couple of days and make sure that stuff's accurate, right? You're talking about weeks, not days.
No, not necessarily. I'm sorry, Chair Gaffin. I should have waited to be recognized.
No, please.
We just, I don't think it will be weeks. We just need to be able to have a couple of days to be able to pull this together and do that. I understand that there is a March 1st deadline, and so I appreciate the urgency on this. It's just, we just need a little bit of time to be able to look at it, knowing that this data comes from multiple sources. And when you have data from multiple sources and you're trying to put it all together, that gives us some pause to make sure that it's still accurately reflected. Sometimes when you do that, it can have some unintended results. And so we just need to be able to have that time to look at it. We're not talking weeks.
Okay. And so I wonder if we could have it an or, that they can either verify it and or have an asterisk under it. That we could vote on that. You know what I mean? If they can't get it done, then we have an asterisk under it.
I think what we're voting on, though, is I don't think we're going to vote on, even if they have new numbers, we're not going to vote on those numbers. And so if they had new numbers and brought them back, we would have to have another vote on that. So I think the language as proposed by Mr. Page, Mr. Sandoval, would be subject to my review a little bit to ensure that it reflects the spirit of this discussion, that we just want to make sure that any data we put out is 100% accurate. And if there is some dispute of it, then we're addressing it. But I don't think even if we had the right numbers, or if these numbers are confirmed to be right, we really can't. So I think we have to kind of move forward with the Page Sandoval motion. And Mr. Page, I know that your hand is still up, and I always get lost in this. Okay. Mr. Esme, your hand is up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to air sort of one more concern. I really, I'm like 99% in favor of the Page Sandoval motion. That's sort of where I am on it, but I'm a little bit concerned that it could lead to us communicating that there is like actual discord between the data subcommittee and DHS on the interpretation of this data. So I might, if that's not actually a concern from anyone who's on the data subcommittee, then maybe we don't even need to address it. But if that is at all a potential concern, I might just sort of add that, Chair Geffen, in your review, that, you could communicate in the language that this is that we're still working through this, not that there is an argument about these conclusions.
And I think that's what would be the intent here. Is I don't think there's anything nefarious going on. I think it's just data can be confusing, especially when we start talking about data on background checks. Is this one person, two people having multiple, or one person having multiple background checks? So I think there is room for clarification, but I agree 100% with you, Mr. Esme. I don't think this is indicating discord.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay. So I think we're at that moment. We got about 14 minutes to go, and I think we're at the moment we need to vote. And I certainly understand there's some people that might not be 100% on board, but we do need to vote at this point. And then we're voting at this point on the Sandoval Page motion that has been seconded. And could you, Mr. Vogel, move forward with a roll call vote?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Senator Champion. Senator Champion. Ms. Dawson.
In favor.
Mr. Esme.
In favor.
Ms. Evans.
In favor.
Mr. Geffen.
In favor.
Mr. Hanson.
In favor.
Ms. Huntley.
In favor.
Mr. Irvin.
In favor.
Ms. Kaser.
In favor.
Mr. Kammer.
In favor.
Lieutenant Knotts. Lieutenant Knotts. Judge Kulik.
In favor.
Senator Matthews. Senator Matthews. Ms. Mattson.
In favor.
Representative Mueller. Representative Mueller. Inspector General Modi.
DHS abstains.
Thank you. Mr. Page.
In favor.
Ms. Robertus?
Not in favor.
All right. Representative Robbins? Representative Robbins. Mr. Sandoval?
In favor.
Judge Satterback?
In favor.
Ms. Sherlock?
In favor.
Mr. Tatum?
In favor.
Ms. Williamson?
In favor.
All right, Mr. Chair, the ayes are 17, the nays are 1, with 1 abstention, the motion carries.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vogel, and thank everybody for that discussion. I think that that's helpful, and it gives us some work to do. Inspector Mahdi, we know, or we'll anticipate to hear from you to include your language by end of business on Monday. And once the final language is complete, we will distribute to everybody. And I think it's important that we continue to ensure that the work that we do is 100. Hello?
Mr. Chair, please,
Yeah.
if I may, I know
Please.
you referenced to Monday, but can we please clarify which Monday that is?
It'll be Monday, the 28th of February. The report is due the next day, so I think that's our last day to get any language in.
I just wanted it to be clearly stated, please. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. And let's continue to work on making sure that we have some consensus on it. And I appreciate very much Mr. Burtis's concerns, and I think we should be working on making sure we have those concerns resolved. Does anybody else have any other business before we adjourn today?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Page.
I just wanted to really thank the leadership of the committee, and but also especially Mr. Vogel, who has been a picture of professionalism and has kept me on track and organized throughout all of the committee meetings, subcommittee and committee meetings. So I just think he deserves some special commendation. Thank you.
I agree. He's been keeping me on task too, so I can relate. There's the love, Mr. Vogel. Take it in, Ms. Robertus, please.
I just also want to say thank you to me voting no by no means undermines the importance of this report and the efforts and work put into it, and do respect all that work, and I think is great stuff in here. So I just want to throw that out.
And yeah, I think, you know, it is not personal, and it's you know, everybody should feel free to dissent and raise their concerns, because that's the only way we're going to get this done right. So I appreciate your honesty and your forthrightness. Thank you, Mr. Burtis. Anybody else? Anything else? Okay, well, thank you, everybody. What a great showing for today. And look at us, out 9 minutes early. You can go enjoy.